welcome to Church at the Grove. I haven't met you yet. My name is Nathan, and man, there is a truckload of kids. They are filing out right now, and there is a massive amount. So we need to pray for all of our kids volunteers right now, I think. They need it. But when you came in, you should have received a program, and we ask for everybody to do this together, whether it's your first time with us or if you're a regular attender. If you would rip off the bottom section that we call the encounter card, we would love to have a record of your visit. If this is your first time with us, man, we are thrilled that you are with us this morning. We would love to have a record of your visit and to send you a little gift this week in the mail just to say thank you so much for being here. We also have a coffee cup that we'd love to give you just on the way out just to say, again, thank you for being here. On the back is a place for prayer requests and comments, a way for you to communicate with our church family about what's going on in your life and how we can best pray for you in the week ahead. And we really do consider that to be one of the greatest honors and privileges to be able to pray over those each and every week. And so we would love to have that. You also can take some next steps on there as well. If you want to join a serve team or get involved in community groups and things like that, you can always sign up on your encounter card straight from there. Well, this morning, excuse me, this morning we are kind of in a little bit of a break, a little bit of a pause in our series. And we just finished a series called Consumed, where we were talking about technology and how technology's role is in our life. And then in a couple weeks, we'll start back with our story series. And so this morning is just kind of a standalone message that we wanted to talk to graduates, but we also wanted to talk to just us as a whole, us as a culture. And we wanted to talk about God's process of preparing us for what he has for us. And I thought about that this week, and I was thinking about, Caitlin, will you throw me my little film case over there? I think I left it right somewhere. Yeah. Here you go. Thank you. Should have grabbed that. I don't know if many of you guys know what this is, but this is film. How many of you guys remember film and you used film? How about that? Okay, a little. There we go. So this is film, and this is how you used to take pictures, right? Before we had digital cameras, before we had phones, this is how you took pictures. You had to have to get this, you'd pull it out a little ways, you'd feed it into the back of your camera, you'd close the back of your camera, and depending on what kind of version you had, you'd either have to wind it up, or you would get the automatic one, and it would automatically feed your camera's film into the camera, right? And that's how you did it. And this film right here, it takes 36 pictures on this roll of film. And so you couldn't go to the beach and you couldn't go and take a million selfies. You had to go and you could only take 36 pictures on this one roll of film. And the other crazy thing about it is that once the picture was taken, you had no way of seeing what the image was. So you had no idea about the lighting. You had no idea about if somebody's eyes were closed, if somebody was smiling or not smiling. And there was just one option. You just had to wait and see what the image was going to reflect once you got it developed. Because you couldn't just take this home and open it up. In fact, if you opened up the back of your camera and the film was still in it, what would happen? It would expose all the film and it would all be washed away. So you had to take this once it was finished and you had to go to the drugstore, you had to go to Walmart or wherever you got your pictures developed. You'd have to put it in an envelope, send it off, and a week later or so you'd get your pictures back and you'd go in and you'd look through all the pictures and you could pick which sizes and stuff that you wanted and you'd have to look through them and you turn in the ones that weren't good and that kind of thing. And then as things kind of progressed, we went to Our Photo, right? Where you could go to the store and you could drop it in there and you'd have to pay a little bit more, but you could get your pictures back in an hour. Now, this is crazy in the world that we live in today, right? Because everything is instant. And this took so long for you to be able to see your pictures. Of course, you had Polaroid that came in there. Polaroid, you had to wait 5 or 6 minutes to see your image on the photo. But now we've got it on our phones. We've got it on our digital cameras. And you can take hundreds and thousands of pictures, see them instantly, delete them if they're not good. You can take bursts of pictures where you can take, 1,000 pictures a minute kind of thing. I mean, it's incredible how the world has changed and how it's progressed. But it's also a very telling argument and a telling way of how our world operates today. Because back 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, things moved at a lot slower of a pace than they do today, right? They moved at a lot slower of a pace. And so what's tended to happen is not only has technology moved to becoming a lot quicker and a lot fast-paced whatever you say. It's moving at a quicker rate of speed, right? Not only is technology moving that way, but we're also seeing that people in general are moving that way as well. And here's what I mean by that. That we live in a society now that is very much a microwave society rather than a crock pot culture. And so it's not this slow and steady wins the race kind of thing. Instead, it's quick, fast, instant. That's what we want for our lives, right? If we have to go to the drive-thru and we're sitting at McDonald's and we're waiting in the drive-thru and we have to wait longer than 5 minutes, we absolutely lose our minds, right? Because it's not instant. It's not quick enough. We want things fast. We want things immediately. That's how we want things, right? In relationships, this happens all the time, where there are people that they want a relationship now, right? They want to get married now. And so they're going to go and they're going to go in that direction regardless of what you say, regardless of what you tell them, because they want results now. They want immediate gratification. That's the world that we live in today. But here's the thing. When it comes to us feeding this immediate gratification idea and desire in our lives, oftentimes we miss out on God's best for our lives. God has a plan for you. It says in Jeremiah 29:11, it says, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you a hope and a future." And so we live in a place and we live in an economy where God has incredible plans for each of your life. No matter where you're at, no matter what you've come through, no matter what baggage you bring into the room this morning, God has an incredible plan for your life. And it's a plan to prosper you and not to harm you, a plan to bring you hope and a future. This is the plan that God has for you. But oftentimes, because of the culture and because of the immediacy that we live in, this immediate kind of culture that we live in, what do? We settle for less than God's best so that we can get the immediate result. And that's not the business that God is in. God is in the long game. He is in the long process that it takes to develop us over time. God develops people much like film is developed. It's sent away, it's put in a dark room, and then in the dark room, over a process of several dippings into chemicals and solutions, God develops us into the people that he wants us to become. It doesn't happen overnight. And this is such an important message, I feel like, for us to hear, because you know people and I know people that at one time, they were walking with Jesus. They were going to church. I have friends of mine that were actively involved in ministry. I mean, people I went to seminary with, and they were serving in the local church. And out of the 5 or 6 friends that I had that were serving in ministry full-time on church staffs, I mean, only like 15 or 10 years removed from that, only 2 of them are now serving in ministry, and I'm one of them. And so we see this oftentimes happening where you have burnout, you have people that fail morally, and you have issues that come up, and people leave, they're following Jesus. They're not following Jesus anymore in their lives. And so we've got to understand God's process and God's plan, and we've got to be committed this morning to following Jesus for the long run. And that's what we're going to see this morning in the book of 1 Samuel. If you don't know where that is, look it up in your table of contents. It's in the Old Testament. And we're going to look at a story in Scripture that I absolutely love. And it's about a man named David. Many of you guys have heard of King David before in your life. And a guy named Samuel. And Samuel is the prophet at the time. And man, incredible man of God. Man, everywhere he went, he was just the voice and almost the face of God. He did these incredible works and incredible miracles. And Samuel has been told by God that he's going to anoint a new king for Israel. Israel already has a king. His name is Saul, but Saul is not following the Lord. He's not trusting the Lord. And so God's going to come into the place, and he's going to say, hey, I'm going to anoint a new king, a new person to rule over Israel. And that's really where our story picks up this morning in 1 Samuel chapter 16, starting in verse 4. It says, Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, do you come in peace? And Samuel replied, yes, in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to sacrifice with me. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So Samuel arrives in the town, arrives in Bethlehem. They're scared out of their minds because they don't know what Samuel's there for. And he tells them, hey, I'm making a sacrifice to the Lord. Somebody in Jesse's house is going to be anointed as the next king. Verse 6, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab. Eliab thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse then had Shammah pass by, and Samuel said, nor does the Lord choose this one. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So we see here that God is working and God is moving, and he's going to choose one of Jesse's sons. And so he lines all of his sons up in front of Samuel. And Samuel looks at the oldest, the strongest, the one that's the most mature. He has the part. He looks the part. He thinks he's going to be a great fit for being the new king of Israel. But God says, this is not who I have chosen. This is not who I have chosen, because I don't look at the outward appearance, but I'm looking at the heart of man. And so I'm not looking at what everybody else is looking like. I'm not looking at the characteristics and everything that everyone else is looking for. I'm looking at the heart of the individual, and that's how I'm going to choose the new king. Now, this is crazy, right? This is kind of comforting and also terrifying all at the same time. It's comforting in knowing that we don't have to always look perfect, right? Which is really great for me, right? It's great that I don't always have to be dressed in my Sunday best, which this is my Sunday best, by the way. It's great that that's not it. It's great that we don't have to have our hair parted a certain way. Really great for me, right? There's a lot of great things that come with this, that it doesn't matter how great you look or what your makeup is put on. It doesn't matter about the outward appearance. It matters what is in the heart. And that's terrifying all at the same time, because I know what's in my heart. And you know what's in your heart. And our heart, the Bible says, is deceitfully wicked above all things. And it leads us astray oftentimes in life. And so I know that my heart is sinful. And God is looking at my heart rather than my outward appearance. And this is how he's choosing the next king. And this is the first kind of idea that we see, that God chooses who he uses. God chooses who he uses. He's not looking at the qualifications. He's not looking at the resumes. He's not looking at the people that have their acts perfectly put together, but he's looking at someone that he can use. And he's choosing based on that. Not based on what they bring to the table, but rather what he's going to do in their lives to develop them to become the people that he wants them to become. So God chooses who he uses. The story continues in verse 11. It says, so he asked Jesse, are these all the sons you have? Which I love that, right? I mean, Samuel is coming to the house of Jesse. Samuel is like the super popular celebrity walking into their household, and Jesse doesn't even bring the youngest son in to meet Samuel. In fact, this is what he says, are these all the sons that you have? And Jesse answered, there is still the youngest. He is tending the sheep. So Jesse doesn't even name him. He doesn't even say, yeah, it's David. I forgot about David. Like, he doesn't even name the kid's name. He just completely dismisses him as someone that's tending the sheep. He's too young. He's not experienced enough. He definitely could not be used by God. Now, obviously, there's some family dynamics here that are really interesting and really messed up. Dysfunctional family for sure. But Samuel says to Jesse, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. And then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. So we see this picture here where David is out in the field. He's not even considered. He's not even somebody that's a thought of possibly being anointed as the next king. His dad, the person that was supposed to love all of his kids equally, doesn't even love him enough to bring him into the household to meet Samuel. Samuel has to specifically ask for David to come into the house. And David comes in, and immediately God says, this is the guy. This is the guy that I'm going to choose, that I'm going to use to be the next king of Israel. And here's what we see about how God chooses us and how he works in our lives, that ultimately God chooses the least and the unlikely. That's how God works. That's how God operates in his economy. It's that God uses the least and the unlikely every single time. And it kind of brings back flashbacks of my elementary school days. And we would be out on the playground and we would be picking teams for kickball, right? And so there's two captains. I was never one of those captains. And I was typically one of the last kids that was picked. It would kind of be like, well, there's Nathan or there's Sally. You know, Sally's in a wheelchair and Nathan's not, but let's choose, it's kind of like, back and forth. Who's are we going to pick? And eventually I would be chosen, but it was always kind of like, y'all can have all the rest. Like, that was kind of how I was chosen. I was never someone that was selected first. I was never someone that was going to be the star athlete on the team. Like, that was definitely not my story. And this is comforting to me because that's who God chooses and that's who God uses. And that's really been my story my entire life. If you would have known me when I was younger, when I was in middle school and in high school, I was incredibly shy. I mean, the thought of even standing up in public and speaking would have terrified me, and I probably would have just gone numb because of the thought of having to stand up in front of people. I remember having to give a speech one time in high school, and I was holding up the poster that I had made, and I just remember doing this. I was just rocking like back and forth and like shaking. My face is all red, and like I hated the idea of ever being up in front of people and talking. Like, that was my worst nightmare. Not to mention, when I was in elementary school, I had a speech impediment. Like, I couldn't speak and I couldn't say certain words and certain phrases and certain sounds. And some of you are thinking, man, you need to work on that some more, right? But that was something I couldn't do. I had this speech impediment that I had to go to speech therapy for several years in order to work past some of those issues. And so the thought of God calling me to do what he's called me to do, and in no way am I patting myself on the back, but the thought of God using me to speak his word and his truth every single Sunday is just mind-boggling. It's mind-blowing, and it just shows that God uses the weak, he uses the least and the unlikely to accomplish his purpose and his plan. And that's great news for you, because I know that what you're thinking in your mind is, God could never use me. Man, because of my background, because of what I've done, because of the sinful things that I'm involved in, the addictions that I'm a part of, because of the way that I've treated people, because of because of the academics that I have been a part of, because I'm not smart enough, I'm not trained enough, I don't have the knowledge of the Bible, I didn't grow up in church, I don't know the scriptures. Like, there's no way that God could ever use me. And I would say, absolutely he can, because that's exactly who he looks for to use over and over and over again. He uses the least and the unlikely. Paul, in the New Testament, he writes about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. He says, brothers and sisters, think of what you were when you were called. Not many of you were wise by human standards. Not many were influential. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. God chose the lowly things of the world to despise the world, to shame the strong. It is because of him that you are in Christ Jesus, who has become for us wisdom from God. That is our righteousness, holiness, and redemption. Therefore, as it is written, let the one who boasts, boast in the Lord. In 2 Corinthians chapter 12, he says this, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. That's the God that we have, a God that looks for the weak, the unlikely, the ones that don't have their acts together. And he says, I want to use you, because I know that when I use you, everybody's going to marvel and say, man, God really is great because we know who this person is. And this person isn't capable of doing what they just did, but it's only because of God's incredible spirit and empowering that they're able to do what they're doing. God wants to get the glory in our lives. He wants us to reflect him and to make a difference in the world. And he chooses the people that are weak, that are the least likely to be chosen. That's the God that we have. And so then we also see finally that God is in the process of preparing us for his plan. God uses a process to prepare us for his plan. The crazy thing about David here is that David is chosen. He is definitely the least and the unlikely. He is not someone that anyone else would have chosen. But we also see that he's anointed in chapter 16. He said that he's going to be the next king of Israel. But then we don't see David become the next king of Israel until 20 chapters later, which would have been about 15 to 20 years by best guess, where he was about 15 when he was anointed king. He was about 30 or so when he was actually appointed as king. And so there was a gap in there, 15 to 20 year gap from when he was anointed to when he was actually appointed to be the next king. And it was during that season that God said, I'm going to take you, a lonely shepherd boy that's been out in the fields keeping watch over the sheep, which was a meaningless job back in that day. I'm going to take you and I'm going to begin to put you through a process and develop you for what I have for your life. And so what does he do? In the next chapter, we see that Saul is coming to a place where he's starting to have these massive migraine headaches, and he's being kind of tormented by all the stuff that's going on physically. And the only thing that calms his spirit is the playing of the harp. Well, guess who plays the harp? David plays the harp. So God takes him from the fields, takes him to the palace, and David, as a 15, 16-year-old boy, starts playing the harp for King Saul to calm his fears and his anxieties. And in the middle of that, God's saying, okay, listen, David, this is the palace. This is how the palace is operated. This is what it looks like to be king. He's giving him an inside view as David serves Saul. A few chapters later, we see that David is now just a lonely kind of lunch boy, right? He's gone home. He's with his father. His father says, hey, I made some great peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Take them out to the battlefield. Go give them to your brothers who are fighting on the front lines. And so they go to the battlefield. David brings the sack lunches, and he gets there, and he's met not just by the Philistine army, but a man named Goliath. And Goliath is standing up in front of his army, and he's challenging Israel. And he's saying, listen, your God's terrible. You don't have what it takes. I mean, he's just slandering them, saying all these negative things, not just about them, but about their God. David hears this and goes, I don't know. Why are y'all all afraid? Like, we need to step up. Like, somebody needs to do something about this giant that's cursing our God. And finally, he says, if no one else is going to go, I'll go. Like, I'll go fight him. Well, and it's interesting because the reason that David feels like he can do that is because he was in the pasture, and when the bears attacked the lambs, he would fight off the bears. Like, how crazy is that? And so he comes in with confidence thinking, hey, I can do this, not because of my own ability, because I know that God is with me. God will take the giant down. And so he goes and he says, hey, I'm the one. I'll go fight him. This is enough. We got to put an end to him slandering our God. He goes to Saul, and Saul says, no, like, you're not the right pick. Like, we need somebody strong. We need somebody mighty. And David says, no, let me in. Like, this is what God's called me to do. So then Saul tries to give him his armor so that David can fight in the best armor. And David says, no, that armor is not for me. Like, I'm going to go and do what God has called me to do. And he goes with a sling and a stone, kills Goliath, chops off his head, holds it up for the whole nation of Israel to see, and defeats the Philistine army really in this moment because of his incredible trust in the Lord and the Lord's power to overcome the enemy. And again, at this point, we see David go from just somebody that was working as a shepherd, and now he's a military kind of giant. He's a military commander. He becomes kind of in charge of the military. And as he grows older and as they progress, we see that it says that Saul killed his thousands, David killed his tens of thousands, that David becomes this incredible man of military might. I mean, just this incredible things that he was able to do, all because God was preparing him in advance. In those 20 chapters, from when he was anointed to when he was appointed, we see that God gives 4 different opportunities for David to take the life of Saul, where he could have killed Saul. But instead of killing Saul, he chooses that I'm not going to try to force my way into becoming king. I'm going to trust God that he's going to provide a way and he's going to do what he said he was going to do. I'm going to take him at his word. If he promised that I was going to be the next king, I'm not going to take that into my own hands, but I'm going to trust him to put me in the place that he wants me to be in. I heard this quote the other day, and it said, we need to stop prying doors open, and we need to start praying doors open. And too many of us are so focused on this idea of prying doors open and trying to work our way and trying to get ahead and trying to motivate and get ahead and elevate ourselves that we're missing out on the plan that God has for us. And we need to step back and just go, God, you're the one that's working. That doesn't mean we don't work hard. We definitely work hard. We try. We do as much as we can. We have the greatest work ethic that anyone should have. But at the same time, we should be people that ultimately are trusting in God to take us from the fields, watching over the sheep, and put us in the palace or whatever place that he has for us. In our world and our culture today, it's about instant. If I can't have it now, then I don't want it. And that's not how God works. That's not how God operates. And I believe that the reason that the church might not have the power that God has called us to have, and we might not have the influence in the world that we should ultimately have, is because we have people that are so set on just the instant that we miss out on what he has for us in the future. We're not running the long race. We're not the tortoise in the hare. We're not the tortoise that's just steadily plodding along, planning and working and being obedient and being faithful. But instead, we're the hare, and it's just like, hey, how quickly can we get there? If we can't get there quick, then let's just don't do it. Let's just go do something else. And that's why we have people that drop out of church. And that's why we have people that don't go the long distance, because they want the instant, immediate gratification, and they want the instant appointment to the kingdom. But they don't want to have the process that God takes us through to develop us into the men and women that he's called us to be. And if you're a graduate in the room, if you're a college student, if you're a high school student, and you're looking and you're planning your future in your life, man, take this into consideration, that God chooses who he uses, that he chooses the least and the unlikely, but he also uses a process to develop us into the people that he wants us to become. And if we focus in on him, if we trust in him, if we let him take us into the dark room of life and go through the process of molding us and making us into the men and women that we are ultimately called to become, then he will take us to places that we never, ever dreamed that we would go. Because his plans are far greater than any of our plans. And so I don't know where you're at. I don't know what you're walking through. But my encouragement to you this morning would be faithful. Be faithful. Stay strong. Be someone that's committed to what Jesus is all about. Be committed to the cross. Be committed to his mission and his vision for your life. Don't allow the world to seep into your life where you begin to kind of go off from what God has for you, settling for what is not best so that you can have the immediate gratification for your flesh. Be someone that runs the long race. Be someone that doesn't get in. Be someone that doesn't grow weary in doing good, but be someone that is committed to the works of God and committed to God himself. And it says that he will lift us up and we will soar on wings of eagles. That's the God that we have. And this matters. This is so important. We've got to get to a place where we are willing to run the long race. Because if we don't get this right, when it comes to your money, when it comes to your finances, when you actually get the raise, when you actually get the big check that comes in the mail, it will tear your life apart. You know why a lot of people that win the lottery, they're people that have no financial margin, they have no financial management up until they win the lottery, and then all of a sudden they've got millions of dollars in their bank account. And most of them go bankrupt within a few years because they have nothing to back them up in the process of when they were elevated. You know why a lot of leaders, we see politicians, we see church leaders even, we see a lot of leaders that are elevated to places of greatness only to fall And when they fall, man, it's just, man, the whole world is against them because of some of the decisions they make, because of affairs, because of scandals, whatever it is, and they fall. Well, why do they fall? Well, it's because they didn't have the character that was backing them up, taking them to that place. Instant stardom and instant fame is never good for the soul. We need a process for God to develop us into the character, people of character that he wants us to become. So what is it in your life that you need to press forward in? What is it that you need to do to continue to be faithful, trusting that God's going to come through in your life and he's going to make his plan and his promises to you come true? Will you pray with me?